Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we will be doing an example with arrays. So in our example, let's say we want to have an array. So let's take an example array. Maybe we have an array like 2, 7, or 2, 4, 6, 3, 1, 4. So we have an array like this. And what I want to do is I want to change each value to add one more to it. So this is the array I'm given. The array I'm given is this. And we change that to, so we want to add 1 to each element in the array. So that'll be 3, 5, 7, 4, 2, and 5. So let's make our array first. We'll have int, and then arr for array, and then we will have our array like that. This is the array we want, or we need curly braces, not square braces. So we have our array. And now we want to add 1 to each element in the array. So what we could do is say we could say arr at 0 equals arr at 0 plus 1. So we would be reassigning arr 0 to arr 0 plus 1. So in reassignment, just like anything, let's go from right to left so that we can see what's actually going on. So arr at 0, that gives us 2, and then 2 plus 1 is 3. So that looks like it should work. And then we could do that for each of these. We could do arr at 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we could write out the same thing and just change our indices here. We could change those, but that would be a lot of copy pasting. Let's see if we can go through it without having to specify each index individually by typing out the index number. So we could use a loop for that. We could do for loop. We could go from int I equals 0, I is less than arr.length, and I plus plus. You'll see this loop quite frequently when you're looping through arrays. You usually start at the 0th index and you go up to its length. Remember, it's a less than, because even though this has 6 values in it, or 6 elements in it, we don't actually have arr at 6. We only go from arr at 0 to arr at 5. We do not have an arr at 6. That's why it's less than. So always keep in mind that it's less than arr.length. So we are going from 0 to 5 in our case. What do we want to do inside the loop? Well, we want to change the value of each element in the array. We can say arr. Now this looks like we're going back to arr at 0, arr at 1, and changing that. But instead of using our value as 0, 1, 2, we have a variable we can use instead. So instead of saying arr at 0, arr at 1, the loop will change the value for us. So we can say arr at I. So arr at I will give us, well, what do we want to set it to? We want to set it to the value that it currently has plus 1. So the value it currently has is arr at I, and then we want to plus 1. So this will change each of these values from 0 up until the length for each of, so this controls, and I++ will tell us that we want to move 1 element each time. We don't want to skip any elements, so we'll go through each element. That's what the I++ does. And this tells us from where to where. So we want to start from 0. We want to start from 0 and go up until the length. Well, not including the length, just before we get to the length, because arr at 6 does not exist. So then we can use our shortcut if we want, we can do import java.util.arrays. And then we can just do system.out.printf %s, and then do arrays.toString and have ARR in there. And this will print out our array. So let's save this, and we should get 357425, which is what we wanted, 357425. This loop allowed us to change each individual element inside our array. Now this might get a little bit complicated, but if you want to shorten this or make it easier to read, we have a reassignment here. So this reassignment, instead of having ARR at I equals ARR at I plus 1, we can just do plus equals 1. So ARR at I plus equals 1. The plus equals also works for arrays. If we run this, we'll still see 357425. Now what about plus plus? If we do ARR at I plus plus, that should also work. Let's save it and run it. And yes, we also get ARR at I plus plus. That's a shortcut for adding 1 to the array. So what about our incrementer? Could we incorporate our incrementer into this statement? Yes, we can. So this I plus plus, we're only moving it by 1 every time, but none of the parts of this for loop are required to be there. We don't need to have an initializer, we don't need to have a check, and we don't need to have an incrementer. Those are all optional. So if we take out our incrementer and we want to do an I plus plus every time, rather than having our incrementer over here, we can have our incrementer for I over here. Now this is a postfix incrementer. That's important to remember. So what this will do is it'll say that, okay, we have an I plus plus in here, so we want to do that after everything else is done. And this over here, we have a postfix incrementer for our array value. So what this will do is say, okay, ARR at I, we're at I right now, so it's 0. So ARR at 0, we want to plus plus that, so the 2 will become a 3. Now when the 2 becomes a 3, then we do the postfix. Then we will get I plus plus, which will be 1. So what's happening here is we're taking out the incrementer and putting it inside the brackets of the loop. So our incrementer is our postfix incrementer, and this plus plus out here is for the reassignment of the value that is at the place before it increments. If we run this, we should still get the same result, 357425. If this was a little bit confusing, don't worry about it. We can still keep our I plus plus over here, I plus plus over here. This is still completely fine, and we can just have our plus plus over here. And if this was also confusing, then that's also fine. We can change this back to ARR at I plus 1. But these are just some options that we have. These are just multiple ways of doing things. So that's how we can cycle through an array and reassign its values. But what if we want to just print out an array instead of completely changing its values? What if we just want to print it out? Well, if we just want to print it out, we don't have to reassign the values. What we can do is just say system.out.printf. We can do system.out.printf %d space, and then we can put ARR at I plus 1. So ARR at I plus 1 will give us our ARR at I, so ARR at 0. So 0 is the first one, so it's 2. So this part is 2. 2 plus 1 is 3. So it'll print out a 3 here. And then the same thing for the 4 when we circle back around and then we get int I, and we're doing I plus plus, so we're going through each I. So then array at 1 would be 4 plus 1, 5, and so on and so forth for the rest of this. So if we just wanted to print out the values without reassigning it, we could do it like this. And then we could also put in a system.out.printf \n. So then this build successful is on a new line. If we wanted to make it look nice, we could do that. So run it and then we get that. But if we print out our loop, system.out.printf %s\n, and we do our arrays.toString ARR. If we print this out, we'll see that we didn't change any of the values in here. They're still the same. So let's try printing it out. So this was from inside the loop where we printed out all the value plus 1, but we didn't change them. There was no reassignment done here. We're just printing out the value. We didn't change the value. So that's why we have the different values up here, but we have the original values down here. So this one will print out the original values because there was no reassignment. There's no equals here. It's just a plus. We did not do an equals. And over here, since there was no equals in the past, it kept the same values. These are the different ways that you can reassign them if you want to, how we did previously, or we can just show what the values are without actually changing the values. This is an example of how we can either change the values or keep the values, display different values. In the next example, we will talk about something a little bit more complicated. In this example, I just wanted to show a little bit of something simple, how we can change the values or how we can keep the same values but display something different. That's the second part we did. In the next video, I'll show a slightly harder example. In this example, I wanted to do two things. One was show you how to change the values of an array through a loop and how we can print it out after it's changed, and what we did just now where we can print out different values but show the original values if we want to as well.